wagon rattled to a stop in the dusty square of Timber Ridge, Montana, sending up clouds of red-brown earth that clung to Clara Ellison's worn traveling dress. Through the canvas flap, she could hear the commotion, men's voices, rough and eager, calling out like they were bidding on livestock at an auction. "Line them up! Let's see what we got this time." Clara's hands trembled as she smoothed down her skirts, knowing what was coming. She'd known since Baltimore, since the moment she'd signed the papers with the marriage broker, that this journey would end in humiliation. 24 years old and still unmarried, she'd exhausted every possibility back east. Her father, a shopkeeper drowning in debts, had made it clear: find a husband or find work as a washerwoman. The frontier, with its desperate shortage of women, had seemed like her only hope. "Come on out, ladies. Don't be shy now." One by one, the other women climbed down from the wagon. There were 7 of them in total. 6 slender, pretty girls with neat waists and hopeful eyes. And then Clara. She waited until last, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. When she finally emerged, stepping carefully down the wagon's wooden steps, she heard it immediately. The silence first, then the whispers that grew into snickers, then outright laughter. "Good Lord, look at the size of that one! Must have been quite a journey for those poor horses." Clara kept her eyes fixed on the ground, watching her shadow stretch across the dirt. She'd learned long ago that making eye contact only made it worse. Her cheeks burned, but she held her chin steady, refusing to cry. Not here, not in front of everyone. The other brides were claimed quickly. Mr. Henderson, who owned the general store, chose a blonde girl named Sarah. The blacksmith selected a brunette with delicate hands. Within 20 minutes, 6 men had stepped forward, paid their fees, and led their new brides away, some gentle, some gruff, but all clearly satisfied with their choices. Clara remained standing alone in the center of the square, her carpet-bag clutched in her plump hands. The marriage broker, a weaselly man named Crawley, kept glancing at her nervously, then at the remaining men who lingered nearby, mostly drifters and drunkards, the sort who couldn't afford the broker's fee. "Now, gentlemen," Crawley called out, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Miss Ellison here is a fine woman, excellent cook, I'm told, strong as an ox and twice as—" He caught himself, but the damage was done. More laughter rippled through the crowd. "Yeah, I bet she could pull a plow all by herself. You'd need 2 beds just to fit her in one room. Hey, Crawley, you going to charge double for that one?" Clara felt something inside her begin to crack. She'd endured mockery all her life, from schoolmates, from neighbors, from every young man who'd ever looked through her as if she were invisible. But this public degradation in front of an entire town was almost more than she could bear. She was just opening her mouth to tell Crawley she'd work off her passage as a cook or cleaner, anything to escape this nightmare, when a sound cut through the jeers. Hoofbeats, heavy and deliberate. The crowd fell silent as a massive figure rode into the square on a black horse that looked barely large enough to carry him. The man was enormous, not fat, but built like a mountain himself. Broad shoulders, thick arms, and a chest like a barrel. His face was hidden behind a wild black beard, and a jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw. He wore buckskin and fur, and a rifle hung across his back. Everything about him screamed danger. Beside him, on a smaller pony, sat a little girl of about 5, her hair a tangled mass of dark curls, her face smudged with dirt. She wore clothes that had clearly been mended many times, and her feet were bare despite the autumn chill. "Thorn," someone muttered nervously. "Didn't expect to see him down from the mountain." The man, Thorn, dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He surveyed the square with cold, dark eyes that seemed to look right through people. When his gaze fell on the remaining women, two rail-thin girls who'd been rejected for looking too frail for frontier life, his expression didn't change. The little girl, however, slipped down from her pony and immediately began walking toward Clara. "Daisy, get back here," Thorn said, his voice a deep rumble that carried despite its lack of volume. But Daisy ignored him. She walked straight up to Clara and stopped, tilting her head back to look up at her. For a long, terrible moment, Clara waited for the child to say something cruel, to point and laugh like everyone else. Instead, Daisy reached out and gently touched Clara's hand. Her small fingers were rough and calloused, nothing like a child's hand should be. "You smell like bread," Daisy said softly, "and cinnamon." Clara blinked, surprised. I made some biscuits on the journey. There might be crumbs." "You're soft," Daisy continued, now pressing her palm against Clara's arm. "Not like Papa. He's all hard and poky, even when he hugs. You're like my old pillow before the feathers came out." Something warm unfurled in Clara's chest. She knelt down, bringing herself eye level with the child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Daisy Thorn. My mama died when I was little. Papa says I need a new mama because I'm growing up wild." She said this matter-of-factly, without sadness, as if discussing the weather. "I see," Clara said gently. "And what do you think? Do you want a new mama?" Daisy nodded vigorously, then turned and shouted across the square, her voice high and clear, "Papa, choose the fat one! I want her!" The crowd gasped. Someone laughed nervously. Clara felt her face flush hot, torn between mortification and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Silas Thorn walked over, his expression unreadable. Up close he was even more intimidating. At least 6.5 feet tall, with hands that could probably crush stone. He looked down at Clara, studying her with those dark, inscrutable eyes. "Can you cook?" he asked bluntly. "Yes, sir." "So?" "Yes, sir." "You afraid of bears, wolves, mountain lions?" Clara swallowed. I can't say I've encountered any, sir, but I imagine I'd be terrified." For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across his scarred face. "Honest, at least?" He turned to Crawley. "How much?" "Well, Mr. Thorn, the standard fee is—" "How much?" Thorn repeated, pulling out a leather pouch. $50, Crawley said quickly, naming a price lower than what the other men had paid. Even he, it seemed, was eager to be rid of Clara. Thorn counted out the money and pressed it into Crawley's hand. Then he turned back to Clara. "Get your things. Winter's coming, and we've got a long ride ahead." You're sure?" Clara stammered. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to know you. Need someone to care for Daisy and keep house. You need a husband and a home. Seems simple enough." He paused, then added gruffly, "I'm not a easy man to live with. I don't talk much. I'm gone hunting for days at a time. The cabin's small and the work's hard. But I'll provide for you, and I'll expect you to do right by my daughter. That acceptable to you?" Clara looked down at Daisy, who was gazing up at her with such hope it made her heart ache. Then she looked back at Thorn. This scarred, dangerous-looking man who nevertheless had kind enough to see her as something other than an object of ridicule. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, it's acceptable." "Good. We leave in 10 minutes." They rode in silence for hours, climbing steadily into the mountains as the sun began its descent. Clara sat behind Silas on the big black horse, her arms wrapped awkwardly around his waist, trying not to think about how her body pressed against his broad back. Daisy rode ahead on her pony, occasionally calling back to point out a deer or an eagle. The higher they climbed, the more Clara's fear grew. The trees here were massive, ancient pines that blocked out much of the sky. The trail was barely visible, just a narrow path winding between boulders and ravines. When she made the mistake of looking down, she saw nothing but sheer drops into darkness. "Don't look down," Silas said, the first words he'd spoken since they left town. "Look where you're going, not where you could fall." "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I'm not used to this." "You will be." As darkness fell, Silas finally called for a halt. They'd reached a small clearing where a stream burbled over smooth stones. While Clara stood uncertainly, not sure what to do, Silas efficiently set about making camp, building a fire, laying out bedrolls, setting snares for rabbits. Daisy plopped down next to Clara. "Are you really going to be my mama now?" I suppose so, if that's what you want." "I do." Daisy bounced excitedly. "The other ladies in town are mean. Mrs. Henderson said I looked like a savage. Miss Dorothy said Papa should send me to an orphanage to learn proper manners." Clara felt a surge of indignation. "That's terrible. You're just a little girl." "Papa says they're fools and their opinions don't matter, but sometimes I wish—" Daisy trailed off, looking down at her dirty hands. "I wish I had a mama who could teach me girl things. Papa tries, but he doesn't know how to braid hair or make pretty dresses." Without thinking, Clara reached out and gently smoothed Daisy's tangled curls. "I could teach you those things. I'd like to, very much." Daisy leaned into her touch, and Clara felt that warm feeling again, spreading through her chest like honey. Silas returned with 3 rabbits. "Can you prepare these?" he asked Clara, holding them out. Clara had never skinned a rabbit in her life, but she'd watched the cook do it back home. "I can try." "Good enough." To her surprise, she managed it, though clumsily. Silas watched without comment, then took over when she struggled with the 3rd one, his knife moving with practiced efficiency. Within an hour, they had meat roasting over the fire, and Clara had made a simple pan bread from the supplies in Silas's saddlebag. "This is good," Silas said, chewing the bread. "Better than what I make." It was the closest thing to a compliment Clara had received in years. She felt herself blush with pleasure. That night, Silas gave Clara his bedroll and made himself another from a spare blanket. Daisy curled up against Clara without asking, seeking warmth. As Clara lay there, staring up at the stars visible through the pine branches, she felt Daisy's small hand find hers. "I'm glad Papa chose you," Daisy whispered. "You're warm." Clara squeezed her hand gently. "I'm glad too, sweetheart." They reached the cabin the following afternoon. Clara's first sight of her new home was both better and worse than she'd imagined. The structure was solid, hewn from thick logs, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. But it was also clearly the domain of 2 people who'd been living without a woman's touch for far too long. Inside, pelts and furs hung everywhere. Weapons lined one wall, rifles, traps, knives. The main room held a large fireplace, a rough-hewn table with mismatched chairs, and a sleeping area partitioned off with a tattered curtain. A ladder led to a small loft where Daisy apparently slept. Everything was functional but cheerless, and a layer of dust covered every surface. "It's not much," Silas said, the first hint of something like defensiveness in his voice. "But it's sturdy. Keeps the cold out." "It's fine," Clara said quickly. "It just needs a bit of tidying." Over the next few weeks, Clara threw herself into transforming the cabin. She scrubbed every surface until her hands were raw. She organized the chaos, creating proper storage for food and supplies. She made curtains from spare cloth and cushions for the chairs from old feed sacks stuffed with pine needles. She discovered that Silas had a small garden plot and set about preparing it for winter, putting up preserves from the last of the vegetables. The work was exhausting, especially given the altitude and the physical demands of frontier life. Clara found herself breathless after climbing the slope to fetch water from the spring. Her dresses, already tight, strained at the seams as she bent and stretched and carried heavy loads. More than once she had to sit down and rest, her heart pounding, sweat dripping despite the cool mountain air. But she didn't complain, and slowly, grudgingly, Silas began to notice. He came home one evening from checking his trap line to find the cabin transformed, clean, organized, with a warm fire and the smell of venison stew filling the air. Daisy, wearing a dress Clara had mended and a ribbon in her newly brushed hair, ran to greet him. Silas stopped in the doorway, staring. "Did you do all this?" Clara, stirring the pot, nodded. "I hope you don't mind. I didn't throw anything away, just arranged things a bit." He walked through the cabin slowly, taking in each change. When he came back to the main room, he looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You didn't have to work this hard." "I wanted to. This is my home now, too." Something softened in his face. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's been a long time since this place felt like a home." As autumn deepened into winter, Clara settled into the rhythm of mountain life. She learned to read the weather in the clouds, to preserve meat in the cold cellar Silas had dug beneath the cabin, to make soap from lye and animal fat. Her hands grew rough and capable, her body stronger despite the constant fatigue. But it was her relationship with Daisy that truly blossomed. The little girl followed her everywhere, eager to learn. Clara taught her letters using a charred stick on a flat piece of wood. She showed her how to knead bread dough and how to tell when the oven was the right temperature. In the evenings, after Silas had gone to sleep in the corner he'd made for himself, insisting Clara take the main bed with Daisy, Clara would hold the child and sing old songs from her childhood, lullabies and ballads, in a voice that was soft and sweet. She didn't know that Silas lay awake, listening, that her voice seemed to ease something hard and painful in his chest, that he'd started looking forward to these evenings more than he'd admit. One morning, Clara woke to find 6 inches of snow on the ground. Winter had arrived in earnest. Silas came in from his morning chores with a grim expression. "Storm's coming, a bad one. I need to check the upper trap line before it hits. Make sure everything's secured. I'll be back tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Clara felt a spike of fear. "But what if—" "You'll be fine. Keep the fire going. Don't go outside unless you have to. There's enough wood stacked on the porch to last 3 days." He pulled on his heavy coat and shouldered his pack. "Daisy knows what to do if there's trouble." He left before Clara could protest further. Within hours, the snow began to fall in earnest. Thick, heavy flakes that quickly obscured the world beyond the windows. That evening, Clara sang Daisy to sleep as usual, holding the child close. But that night, Daisy's forehead felt warm. By midnight, she was burning with fever. Clara's hand shook as she felt the child's scorching skin. She'd helped care for her younger siblings through various illnesses, but this seemed different, more intense. Daisy was delirious, crying out for her mother, thrashing in the bed. For the first time since arriving at the mountain, Clara felt truly helpless. She was alone, miles from any doctor, in the middle of a blizzard, with a desperately sick child. But giving up wasn't in her nature. She might be fat, she might be unwanted and unloved, but she was capable. She had to be. Clara spent the night in a blur of activity. She made cool compresses to bring down the fever. She brewed tea from herbs she'd seen Silas use. She held Daisy through the worst of the shivers, wrapping her in quilts and using her own body heat, her despised, shameful body that was nevertheless warm and soft, to keep the child from freezing when the fever broke into chills. Hour after hour, Clara worked, prayed, and sang. Her voice grew hoarse, but she kept going, filling the cabin with gentle songs as if her voice alone could tether Daisy to life. As dawn broke, the fever finally began to subside. Daisy's eyes fluttered open, clearer than they'd been all night. "Mama," she whispered. Clara's heart nearly stopped. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here." "I'm hungry." Clara laughed, the sound half-sob. "That's a very good sign. Let me make you some broth." She was at the stove when the door burst open and Silas appeared, covered in snow, his face haggard. He must have traveled through the night and the storm to get back. "Daisy," he started. "She's better," Clara said quickly. "She had a high fever, but it broke just before dawn." Silas crossed to the bed in 3 strides, touching his daughter's forehead, checking her pulse. When he turned back to Clara, his eyes were shining with something that might have been tears. "You saved her," he said, his voice rough. "If you hadn't been here—" "But I was here," Clara interrupted gently, "and she's going to be fine." Silas looked at her then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, saw past the soft curves and plump face to the strength beneath, saw the woman who'd spent a sleepless night caring for a child who wasn't even hers by blood, saw someone who'd chosen to stay and fight rather than run when things got hard. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About what?" "About what I needed. I thought I needed someone to keep house and watch Daisy. But what I needed, what she needed, was you." The blizzard lasted 3 more days, trapping them all inside the cabin. But the atmosphere had shifted. Silas, who usually maintained a careful distance, began to soften around Clara. He spoke more, sharing stories of his life in the mountains, of his late wife, and how they'd built this cabin together with their own hands. "She was a good woman," he said one evening, whittling by the fire while Clara mended clothes. "Strong, brave, she died bringing Daisy into the world, and I blamed myself for a long time." "It wasn't your fault," Clara said gently. "Maybe not. But I swore I'd never put another woman at risk like that. That's why I needed—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Someone practical," Clara finished for him. "Not a wife, really, just a helper." "Yes," he paused. "But I was a fool." Clara's heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" Silas set down his knife and turned to face her fully. "You're not just a helper, Clara. You're Daisy's mother now, in every way that matters. And you're—" He struggled with the words. "You're my wife. I've been treating you like hired help, keeping my distance, but that's not fair to either of us." "What are you saying?" Clara whispered. "I'm saying that when I look at you, I don't see what those fools in town see. I see someone who makes this cabin feel like a home, who makes my daughter laugh, who sings so sweetly it makes my chest ache, who's stronger than any delicate town woman could ever be because you've had to be all your life." He stood and crossed to her, kneeling down so they were at eye level. "I'm saying I'd like to try being a real husband to you if you'll have me." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm not beautiful, Silas. I'm not." "You are," he interrupted fiercely. "You're beautiful in the ways that matter, in the ways that last. Those women in town, they'd last one winter up here before breaking. You've made this mountain your home. You've made us your family. That takes a kind of beauty most people never find." He reached out and gently cupped her face in his calloused hand. "May I kiss you, Clara?" She nodded, unable to speak. His kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he feared breaking her. But when Clara leaned into it, responding with her own hesitant passion, it deepened. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Papa's kissing Mama!" Daisy called out gleefully from the loft, making them both jump. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" Silas laughed, the sound so unexpected and joyful that Clara couldn't help but join in. "Yes, little one, we're a real family." Winter eventually gave way to spring, and with the thaw came the necessity of a trip to Timber Ridge for supplies. Clara dreaded it, knowing she'd have to face the people who'd mocked her, but Silas was insistent. "You're my wife," he said firmly. "You're Daisy's mother. Anyone who has a problem with that will answer to me." They rode into town on a bright April morning. Clara wore her best dress, one she'd altered to fit better, with a shawl Silas had given her made from the softest deer hide. Daisy sat in front of her, chattering excitedly about seeing the general store. The moment they arrived, Clara felt the stares. Whispers followed them as they dismounted and walked toward Henderson's general store. She kept her head up, refusing to show fear, but her hands trembled slightly. Inside the store, Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. "Why, Mr. Thorne and little Daisy, don't you look clean?" "My wife's doing," Silas said evenly, his hand finding the small of Clara's back, a possessive, protective gesture that made Clara's heart soar. "Your wife?" Mrs. Henderson's voice dripped with false sweetness. "How nice. I do hope she's been satisfactory." "More than," Silas said, his tone cooling. "Best thing that ever happened to us." They were gathering supplies when the door opened and a drunk stumbled in, the same man who'd mocked Clara the day she arrived. His eyes fell on her, and he grinned nastily. "Well, well, Thorne's fat bride, still here, are you? Surprised the bed hasn't collapsed yet. Or maybe that's why he sleeps in the barn, eh?" The man laughed at his own joke. Before Silas could move, Daisy planted herself in front of Clara, her small fists clenched. "Don't you dare talk about my mama that way. She's the best mama in the whole world. She saved my life, and she makes the best bread, and she's warm and soft and perfect." The drunk blinked, taken aback by the child's ferocity. Then Silas moved. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the man by the collar and lifted him off his feet, slamming him back against the wall. The entire store went silent. That woman, Silas said, his voice deadly quiet, is my wife. She's the mother of my child. She kept my daughter alive through a blizzard when I couldn't get home. She's made our house a home. She's worth 10 of you miserable, whiskey-soaked wastes of air. He leaned in closer. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to my wife. Then you're going to leave this store and stay out of our sight. And if I ever hear you or anyone else speak disrespectfully about Clara, I'll make sure you regret being born. Do we understand each other?" The man nodded frantically, his face purple. Silas dropped him, and he scrambled toward Clara, stammering apologies before fleeing the store. Silas turned to face the other customers, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "Anyone else have comments to make about my family?" Silence. Then Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat nervously. "Of course not, Mr. Thorne. We're all very happy for you. Mrs. Thorne seems like a very capable woman." Silas's eyes swept the room one more time before he nodded. Then he turned to Clara, and his entire demeanor softened. He held out his hand. "Come on, let's get what we need and go home." Clara took his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But they weren't tears of shame this time. They were tears of pride, of belonging, of love. As they loaded their supplies onto the horse, the preacher's wife approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Thorne, I just wanted to say, Daisy looks wonderful. You've done a remarkable job with her." Clara smiled. "Thank you. She's a joy. And if you ever want to join us for the ladies' sewing circle, you'd be most welcome." It was an olive branch, perhaps motivated by fear of Silas rather than genuine acceptance, but Clara recognized it for what it was, a first step toward being seen as part of the community. "I'll think about it," she said graciously. On the ride home, Silas was quiet. Finally, he said, "I meant what I said back there. You're the best thing that ever happened to us." Clara leaned her head against his broad back. "You're the best thing that happened to me, too. Both of you." "Papa," Daisy called from her pony, "can we have Mama's special stew tonight? I told everyone in town about it, and now I'm really hungry." Clara laughed. "Of course, sweetheart." Back at the cabin, as Clara prepared dinner and Silas chopped wood for the stove, Daisy played outside, singing one of the songs Clara had taught her. The sound drifted through the open windows, sweet and clear. Silas came inside and found Clara at the table, rolling out dough for biscuits. He watched her for a moment, taking in the sight. Her capable hands working the dough, the concentration on her face, the way afternoon light caught in her hair. She looked up and caught him staring. "What is it?" He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms despite the flour on her hands. "Do you remember that first day, when Daisy said you were soft and warm?" Clara blushed. "Yes, I remember thinking it was the nicest insult I'd ever received." "It wasn't an insult. It was the truth. You are soft and warm, and that's exactly what we needed. Daisy needed someone she could run to for comfort, someone who wouldn't break when she hugged too hard, someone who could hold her when she was sick and scared." He paused, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I needed someone strong enough to survive up here, someone who wouldn't give up when things got hard, someone who could see past the scars and the rough edges to the man underneath." "I see you, Silas," Clara whispered. "I've always seen you." "I see you too, Clara, all of you, and what I see is beautiful." That night, after Daisy was asleep and the cabin was quiet, Silas took Clara's hand and led her to the bed they now shared. Their love-making was tender and passionate, a celebration of everything they'd found in each other. When it was over, Clara lay in Silas's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I used to think my body was a curse," she said softly, "something to be ashamed of. But you and Daisy, you've shown me that it's just a body, and what matters is what I do with it, how I use it to care for the people I love." "Your body is perfect," Silas murmured into her hair. "Perfect for me, perfect for Daisy, perfect for this life." In the loft above, Daisy smiled in her sleep, dreaming of her mama's soft arms and sweet voice, of her papa's strong hands and warm laugh, of a family that was whole and real and forever. Outside, the mountain wind sang through the pines and spring flowers bloomed in the meadow. Inside, Clara Thorne, once mocked, once rejected, once certain she'd never be loved, finally understood what it meant to be home. The cabin had expanded. Silas had built an addition, a proper bedroom for him and Clara, and a larger loft for Daisy and her new baby brother Samuel. Clara rocked the infant gently as she watched Daisy help her father repair the fence around their expanded garden. The pregnancy had been difficult, her size making everything harder, but Silas had been there every step of the way, holding her hand, whispering encouragement. When Samuel finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Silas had wept with relief. "I was so afraid," he'd confessed later, "after what happened with Margaret." "I'm not Margaret," Clara had said firmly. "I'm stronger than I look. We both know that now." And she was. She'd survived 2 harsh mountain winters, multiple illnesses, a difficult birth, and countless other challenges. Her body bore the marks of hard living, rougher hands, sun-weathered skin, more scars and calluses than any lady of society would tolerate. But she wore them with pride. The town had slowly come to accept her, especially after she'd helped deliver Mrs. Henderson's baby when the doctor couldn't make it through a storm. Now, when they visited Timber Ridge, people greeted her with genuine respect. Some even sought her advice on healing herbs and preserving food. But none of that mattered as much as this. Watching her husband and daughter work together, knowing her son slept safe in her arms, feeling the mountain breeze carry the scent of pine and wildflowers. "Mama!" Daisy called. "Come see! Papa and I fixed the whole fence." Clara carefully laid Samuel in his cradle and walked outside. Daisy, now 7 and growing like a weed, threw her arms around Clara's waist. "When Samuel's bigger, can I teach him the songs you taught me?" "Of course, sweetheart." Silas approached, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at Clara, his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, and smiled. It still amazed him sometimes how wrong he'd been about what he needed. He'd thought he wanted convenience, someone to fill a role. Instead, he'd found love, and it had come in the most unexpected package. Clara met his gaze and smiled back, knowing exactly what he was thinking. She'd found her home, her family, her purpose, and she'd found it because one little girl had looked past the surface to see what really mattered. "Choose the fat one, Papa," Daisy had said, and Silas had, and it had changed everything.